Okay, so I'm gonna start with our presentation. So this presentation is titled America's Newest City, and I'll kind of go into it later and show why it's called America's Newest City. But my topic will be on housing and redlining in California's Central Valley. In reality, I'm going to focus just on Bakersfield and some of Kern County. So this is just an introduction to show kind of some of the imagery here on the first slide. This photo that says "No color trade solicited" is from Bakersfield, California. Some of these photographs aren't widely distributed or seen here in Bakersfield. From when I talked to other historians, this is like one of none. This is really the only one that exists from what I know. And in reality, it's because the NAACP fought to remove these signs in the 1950s. And here locally, they passed ordinances to ban the posting of racially exclusive signs in businesses. So it could be that, we either aren't archiving them enough or that they, since they were eliminated in the 50s, just many don't exist. This photograph was from a tourist that came by and this is the only photograph they took from Bakersfield. Alrighty, okay. And now I'm going to detail some of the lived conditions of minority people here in Bakersfield. This is from a report from 1930 conducted by the governor's fact-finding committee. And in this report, they asked real estate groups in California cities whether they segregated or they had Mexican districts. Bakersfield is one of those cities that says that yes, that they segregated Mexicans. In this report, they also said that racially restrictive covenants was one of the tools used to racially segregate people in Bakersfield, and that's where it says right here that it says almost most of the clauses seek to restrict the occupancy of premises to persons of Caucasian race. In some instances, the Mexican was definitely specified as prohibited from occupancy. So these are some of these legal language that were used for racial exclusion. So in here, I also have the detailed conditions of housing in East Bakersfield. And in this, it's a pretty big report, but I'll read one quote. It says, "There are no sanitary facilities whatsoever. The people having to use pit toilets whose stench is readily recognizable miles away along the alleged business district Congwood Road." So this is kind of showing the stark conditions of segregated housing. And these are some of the photographs that I found at the Kern County Museum that are photographs of homes in Congwood area. And this is actually a printed article from the Crisis magazine, which was the magazine of the NAACP. And this originally was a letter to the regional office to San Francisco, where Frank H. Williams spoke about the conditions of housing. And later on, this was converted to an article in the national magazine. So now that I talked about briefly about housing conditions and segregation, we're going to go into in the 1930s. For those that are listening, I usually say, have you heard about this? And you raise your hand, but so we're on Zoom. For those that have heard about the New Deal, the Great Depression, things are pretty much spoken about in American history. These programs were created to get people out of the Great Depression. The FHA, the Federal Housing Administration, and the HOLC, Homeowners Loan Corporation, were created to stop home foreclosures at that time of the Great Depression. They're New Deal programs. They're federally sponsored, federally backed, and they also supported racial segregation. So in this, and I still have the same problem with my other map, but for those that are familiar with redlining maps, I believe your professor might have spoken about them as well. So Fresno did have a map. So Bakersfield is widely reported on that it didn't have a map, and it's because it didn't have a large population at the time. So Fresno did, but these maps were color coded, and each color was a different grade. And by grade, I mean like the level that the FHA or the HOLC would finance. So the highest grade being the most financeable, the most investment worthy, and red being the worst, right? And that's where we get the term redlining from, is the red marks that they put on these maps, and red most often meant communities of color, right? So, but in Bakersfield, we don't have a map. And that's not to say that we didn't have these types of practice. These are grading evaluations of like maps. So here is a sample of a grading that happened in East Bakersfield in 1954, where we see Some of the things are like civic and social community centers. So whether you had a hospital, whether you had an auditorium, whether you had a civic center and things like that. So these types of gradings were used to figure out if your home was worth financing, right? And most often in communities of color where there was little investment in public health or social and civic centers, this meant a lower grade. So the grade was affected by this. So this is just to show that just because we don't have a map, that we didn't have grading. We did have grading, right? So showing that connection. So the FHA in 1938 also taught its home lenders to use racially restrictive covenants. Racially restrictive covenants are agreements between homeowners and buyers, and in these agreements, they they would put like different specifications, like you have to be this race, you have to build this much amount of money, you have to, you can't have this type of employment in the home. So here is the underwriting manual, which was the manual where they taught real estate agents how to sell their homes, to who to sell them, and what contracts to write. So here in the underwriting manual, we can see under section G, prohibition of the occupancy of properties except by the race for which they are intended. So this is the FHA's manual teaching real estate agents that segregation is something that they value, right? So, and this is not necessarily unique to the 1930s. So before 1938 and the FHA, the National Association of Real Estate Boards also used this language to segregate homes as early as the 1890s with restrictive covenants. So whenever the FHA and the HOC were formed, they actually tapped leaders from the National Association of Real Estate Boards, which brought in this language and this practice, right? And here on the right, on Article 3, this is language from a Bakersfield neighborhood where they use that language, and it says, quote, no part of property shall be used or occupied or permitted to be occupied by any person not of the white or Caucasian race, except for such persons as are engaged in bona fide domestic employment of the owner, therefore, or of those holding under said owner. So this was racially exclusive language that you cannot own the home, but if you were a color, you could be a domestic laborer, right? So, and many homes in Bakersfield during that time used this type of language. And for those that are interested in further reading, Paige Glotzer, she's a historian that talks a lot about the National Association of Real Estate Boards in the 1800s and early 1900s and their effect on housing in the modern era. So prior to 1938, before the use of large racially restrictive covenants for whole neighborhoods, we did have the existence of this language for individual homes. So we have here an advertisement from the Bakersfield Realty Building Company that is being organized. And in this advertisement, they say, quote, all lots will be restricted to not less than 1,000 dwellings, as well as to members of the Caucasian race, and no saloons will be permitted on the property, right? So even from I think this is 1909. Yeah, 1909, they're already using this language for individual homes. And here I have this grant deed, which is a contract for an individual home. This is from 1924 that also has that language, and this is pre-FHA. This is the lands herein conveyed shall never at any time be sold or rented to or occupied by any person not of the white or Caucasian race. And this is an example of this language used for an individual home. So this is the role of real estate agents. So in the early 1900s, real estate agents had a very bad name. They had a name that was synonymous with abuse, with taking people's properties. So in the early 1900s, they invented this word called realtor. And the realtor was supposed to be different because they had code of ethics, they had rules, they had the underwriting manual, they had all these things that supposedly limited their abuse, right? And they reimagined their practice. But in their code of ethics, they also had a language that was problematic, right? So in some of the things I question, like what is their code of ethics in reality? Is it really ethical? So in 1924, the National Association of Real Estate Boards, Article 34 states, a realtor shall never be instrumental in introducing into a neighborhood a character of property or occupancy, members of any race or nationality, or any individual whose presence will be clearly detrimental to property values in the neighborhood. So this is if if they don't agree with your race or occupancy, they're not going to sell you that home, right? And this is some of the under the reinvention of the real estate agent as a realtor. So, and this is the California Code of Ethics for the California Real Estate Association. A realtor should never be instrumental in introducing into a neighborhood a character of property or use which will be clearly detrimental to the property values in that neighborhood. So this is very similar to that language in 1924. But by 1950, they're no longer mentioning race, but they have a lot of other ways to exclude. So this is the racially restrictive map that we've created, mapping all of the covenants. So in between 1938 and 1950, we found 171 of these contracts for neighborhoods. The reason we did 1938 to 1950 is because they're writing them for entire neighborhoods during that era. So before 1938 is just individual homes, which we haven't really gone into that research, but this is just the Bakersfield map right now. And then here, for those that are familiar with that, George Bush once lived in Bakersfield. He lived in this neighborhood, a white-only neighborhood. I have the arrow right here. And then from that report that I read in the very beginning with the homes and the toilets, this is that neighborhood right there. And this was designated as a Black-only neighborhood. And at the end, I'll go through it and I'll show you the maps as well. So in 1948, there was a Supreme Court decision, Shelley versus Kramer, that banned the enforcement of racially restrictive covenants in courts. So you couldn't take these to courts and say, all right, I don't want them to live there. You couldn't enforce it that way. You could enforce it in other ways. You just couldn't go to courts. And the FHA reinforced that decision in 1950, where they said that they would no longer finance homes that had racially exclusive language. And I think that's why we stopped seeing the language in Bakersfield. I'm part of a coalition that other people in other universities are doing research in the United States, and they've seen that language as late as the 1960s. So for Bakersfield, I think it's because of the FHA, but that doesn't mean that racial exclusion it stopped, right? It just meant that they stopped writing it in contracts because it affected financing. So in reality, lasting change doesn't come until 1968 with the Fair Housing Act. So the question with the banning of loans, the grading, the question is, how did racial minorities buy, right? So we have this agreement right here. This is with John Wilburn. He was the founder of St. John's Missionary Baptist Church in East Bakersfield, and he bought on contract. So buying on contract meant like a rent-to-own practice, where you went to a real estate agent who most likely owned the property. And what he did is he gave you a loan with no bank. You just talk to him. And if you didn't meet the down payment, and the down payment was most like 40, 50%, then he wouldn't take it to the holo record to be notarized. So these practices became very abusive since there was no really third party to vet them out. You didn't have really regulation. It was just kind of, you bought from them and you bought under their terms. So this is this type of loaning was very abusive. So we have one of those examples here in Bakersfield. And we have many boxes. I think I have like 10 or 15 boxes of these contracts. So it was widely used by people of color. So in 1952, Bakersfield has a big earthquake. And in this earthquake, they invest lots of money. It's during this time period as well, right? Where we're talking about home loans, investment of neighborhoods. So 1952's earthquake, it levels downtown. They reinvest to reimagine downtown Bakersfield. Downtown Bakersfield is right now kind of an image of what happened after 1952. So that's why we really don't have like a historic downtown, is because they rebuilt it. So unlike other cities where they could abandon their downtowns, Bakersfield chose to rebuild theirs. So for those that have visited like Sacramento or Los Angeles, they have like these historic downtowns. Bakersfield doesn't, because they rebuild it. And that kind of makes Bakersfield unique, since they didn't abandon it and start a brand new downtown. But with this type of history, we look at like who's excluded, right? So that neighborhood that I spoke about, it's actually right behind this advertisement, and it's not actually drawn on the map. It's almost like if it didn't exist, right? So that's what it looked like with like tourism history and history of urban investment, is who's excluded. And that's where we get the presentation title of America's Newest City. That was Bakersfield's kind of advertisement platform. Today, it's the sound of something better. So when I look at these, it looks like who's being excluded, who's not being invested in, and we can see that in this map. So here's some of the examples of the investment in urban Bakersfield after the earthquake. Bakersfield College was at the site of Bakersfield High School. It used to be Kern Union High School, and they shared the campus. The college and the high school were there together. In 1956, the community college leaves that downtown area and goes to the east, right? We can see a lot of the investment with the racially restrictive covenant map, and they moved to the East Bakersfield. And you can see in these advertisements, Bakersfield, a comfortable place to live. And it's a very stark reality to the report in the beginning, right? Where they're talking about housing conditions, how bad they are, right? And here's a short list of buildings that were rehabilitated or reconstructed. We have City Hall, Mercy Hospital, St. Paul's Episcopal, First Christian, First Congregational, St. Joseph's, Pleasant View, Court Building, the jail and garage, library, Arvin Auditorium, Tehachapi Veterans Memorial Building, Taft Library, Bakersfield Veterans Memorial Building, Stony Brook Retreat, Arvin High School, Kern Union High School, Bakersfield City Schools. They also built Lake Ming, and they also converted Lake Isabella into a boating lake. So we get a lot of urban and also tourist investments. And you can see from this advertisement, it says the street scene is modern, right? And so the amount of money that comes into reimagine Bakersfield is in the millions of dollars. So these are the homes affected. Here we have this home. This is from the Kern County Museum, and it says this is a Negro home. And this is kind of the view of what modern homes look like, at least in some of the segregated neighborhoods. So during the 1940s, we did have a white real estate developer build brand new homes in the segregated neighborhoods, but he only built a block. So in the Mayflower district, it was like a small little neighborhood where they did build new homes, but the rest really did look like this, the way we see them in this condition, right? So you had very new homes, but also homes that were dilapidated. So during this time period is what historians refer to as white flight. When white residents leave, so does investment, right? So this is when this neighborhood becomes primarily Hispanic and Black as well. So, and for those who are familiar, we spoke about this in the other class. This is an area that's still in poverty, is still an area that lacks investment. And the question is, almost 100 years later, why? So we're going to go now into eminent domain and the building of the highways. And this is the building of Highway 58. And this is she was a Black migrant dust bowler. They came to Bakersfield from Berkeley, Oklahoma. And this is her experience in the 1960s when they're moving her from her home so they could build the highway. And I think I'm going to play it. Let me know if you can hear the audio. Nope. Okay. Let me go to share sounds.
You know, the 1954 Supreme Court decision came in, and a lot of things, many things, opened up for Black people. But it was also a progressive thing, you know, something you have to keep working on. The reason I thought about that is when we was looking at this house, when we lived up on Madison Street, and the state bought our house for the freeway, and we thought we'd just go out, and it was 1960 by then, we thought we'd just go out and buy a house, but I went out and I just couldn't, they just didn't, there just wasn't a house for me. And my husband, I had, finally they were building a new house, and I had been over there looking at it, and I think my husband must have mentioned something about, at that time we could sue, you know. So his boss told him, called him in and told him that he could not sue. If he did, he wouldn't have a job.
This just kind of shows the barriers as far as not being able to find a home, right? Real estate agents saying these homes aren't for you. And then also, you know, the boss calling the husband and saying, if you do sue, you won't have a job. So there's a lot of barriers, right? And we're starting to see this, especially during the building of the highway.
You know, the 1954.
There we go. So these are just some of the imagery of the highway. So usually the most vulnerable are moved, right? And then usually these are the most affordable housing as well. So we can see some of the advertisements from Kern County. It says transportation links to the future, right? So the question is, to what feature, right? And here we have the map from the highway in 1970, just showing where it goes through, and that they advertised it as something that was beneficial to business as well. So, and then some of the things that need to be studied, at least in the present, are the building of the Centennial Corridor project, which is a new highway that's going to cut through extending the 58 and the 99 to the West Side Parkway to the I-5. From reports that I've read, it states that at least 300 homes were destroyed and about 900 residents were displaced. So as these neighborhoods become older, they become more affordable, but they also become more likely to be destroyed for eminent domain projects. So eminent domain is when the state buys your property, and it could be because it's dilapidated or it's not to the standard of code, or that they have a project in mind. And usually it's the most affordable neighborhoods they go after. So in this is definitely a future study, something that I'm looking into, but others, I definitely encourage you to look into some of these newer projects as they move people, who they move, why they move, and how they do things intentionally. So there is some restorative justice for those restrictive covenants that I spoke about. If you live in one of those neighborhoods or you live in a home that has that language, you can now get it removed from the record. While these records aren't necessarily legally enforceable, the restrictive covenants, there's been articles recently of people finding them as they're going through the home loan process, where they'll go through old covenants and they'll say they'll have racially exclusive language. Now you can get that removed, and that's through Assembly Bill 1466, and through the county, because of that law, you're able to strike that language now. And also in 2002, the California Association of Realtors apologized for their role in discriminatory housing practices and announced their effort to promote fair housing. So they've recently apologized, but their apology has never been in depth or a really wide study of why or how they affected race and housing in California. But that's why these talks are very important to have today, to talk about kind of their role. And now that they have apologized, what does that mean, right? And what do these efforts mean to reverse those impacts that we still go through today? So I'm going to kind of conclude, and then I'm going to go back to the webpage, and then I'll open up for questions. We do have an upcoming program. We'll have a conversation on the two Chinatowns that we're here in Bakersfield. I'll be speaking again with my colleague Aline Diaz. We'll be talking about activism and housing, and how the Sunset Mayflower Progressive Club fought to get fair housing. And then I'm still working on the exhibit. I'm waiting for an update on our printing shop to give us all our exhibit materials to put up. But I hope by the end of the week or next week, we'll have the exhibit running, and I invite you to come. I'll let your professor know once we're ready, and then that way you can stop by. And then I'd like to thank you. If you have any questions, our email is archives@cecb.edu. And then I do have a survey, but I'll send the link right now. So let me stop sharing, and then I'll show the page. In the meantime, if you want to brainstorm some questions, definitely open for questions or anything. This is also a California United States history, so don't be afraid to ask, like California based questions. So I'm going to send some links real quick. And that is for our website that we're dedicating to some of this history, in case you're interested in following up or doing research on it. This is the covenant modification for the Hall of Records. This is a link to Assembly Bill 1466. And I do have a survey, if you have a quick moment to take it at the end, just to let us know how we're doing. And then let me share the screen and kind of go through our website. Can everyone see the website? Yes, okay, great. So here we have an explanation of racially restrictive covenants. We have a look into neighborhoods, suburban expansion before 1938, an experience of moving into a white neighborhood. That's in there from Bakersfield. Public housing, there's a section on public housing and eminent domain. There's various things, but I'm going to go through the map right now because that's something I've been working on lately. And I did change the color. I know there's some confusion on the other class, so now it's much more color coded. But these are all the neighborhoods. All the green ones were designated as white-only neighborhoods, and the red one was designated as a black-only neighborhood, which would have been a red line neighborhood. So I know last time they were all red, so I dedicated the last hour to fixing it. So, but these are if you put in your address, you can find, if you live in a formerly racially excluded neighborhood. I looked up my address. I live around this area, and to see a neighborhood, to learn that I grew up in a neighborhood that used to be white only, now it's predominantly Hispanic. To kind of think of, like, I would have never belonged there in the 1940s. I would have been excluded. Is something to think about. Like, as demographics change, we also look at, as investment changes, stores leave, what comes in, and what does that mean. So I encourage you all to take a look at the website if you're interested in following up on the research. And for now, I'll stop sharing and I'll open up for questions.